Oh. Hi, Charlotte.
Good morning, Rabbi.
How are you? I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I think okay. I get up in the morning. That's it.
That's a very good thing.
Yeah. 4 o'clock. Did you have your cell phone on 4 o'clock in the morning? There was a horrible noise and a light. And by the time I got my glasses on to see what it was, it disappeared. And I found out today that it had something to do with letting us know that a little kid, a baby, was kidnapped.
Oh, I didn't hear it, but I did get the
Amber Alert, yeah.
the Amber Alert.
The Amber Alert, that's what it's called.
Yeah. Hi,
That
Carol.
was- That
Hi.
was the end of sleeping.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's very terrible. It's terrible
Mhm.
that a baby would be stolen.
Yeah, and
It's
apparently
bad.
by-
That's worse.
the father, which is not uncommon.
Father did it?
Well, that's one suspicion that
Uh-huh.
I saw on the note. But
By the time I got my glasses on, the thing disappeared.
yeah,
I couldn't see what was going on. Oh, well.
God, I'm never gonna get caught up with everything. Hi, Hoodie. How you doing?
Hi, Rabbi Papi. How are you? How was
Good,
your
thanks.
vacation?
Well, it wasn't so much of a vacation, although we did have a lot of people visiting from our friends in Ottawa, who's they took their daughter to the airport. She's now in Israel on Ulpan, preparing to become a lone soldier.
That's really, really nice.
Yeah, I mean it's a totally remarkable story. This is a young woman.
Rabbi Papi.
Yeah, it's a very interesting family. It's an intermarriage, although her mother is president of her Reformed synagogue, and they had Sukkah growing up for a number of years. They were in the day school and same age as Noah. They're very close, and then the two of them were talking about getting an apartment together in Jerusalem when she finishes the army. So who knows? Hi, Susie. Hi, Maddie.
I
Good morning, everyone.
can't see anybody.
Susie,
don't
we
know
can see
why.
you perfectly.
We see you. We hear you.
We see you and we hear you. That's right.
I'm
Ricky.
going out and coming back in.
Okay. Hi, Ricky.
And Charlotte.
Hello, everyone.
I'm
We got
here.
everybody but Shell. Oh, Rabbi
Yeah.
Zucker's there
In
too.
here, yeah, Rabbi
But he
Zucker.
doesn't look like it's really him. It looks like
Ah, now I
Let's
can
see.
see you.
now I see him.
Well, you really
Hi, Rabbi.
needed Rabbi Zucker to come in, so then it was
It's much
okay.
better for real when you're doing your back picture. And
All
here
right.
comes Shell. Yay,
so
we're ready to go, Rabbi.
The gang's all here. Let me share my
Ah,
screen.
here you go.
That shows you how much we miss you.
Yeah, well, I missed everybody. So it's kind of fun to have everybody back. All right.
Yes.
I hope you make it bigger.
That's what I'm trying to
Yes.
do. I do not understand.
Do it bigger yourself.
Oh,
You've
there
done
we
it.
go.
You've done it before, Rabbi.
Yeah,
You can do it
no,
again.
I know I can do it. Just
And you did it.
yes.
You've done
Everybody
it.
can see that, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right, good. So once again, great to see everybody and hope everybody's doing well.
Yeah, we saw that already.
We're doing a lot better knowing that you're back, Rabbi Papi.
Yeah.
And that
So-
we're gonna have a Parsha class every week.
Yep,
We lost 3
Um,
great Parshiyot.
right.
Okay. You know,
So this one is pretty powerful too. Of course, the concluding parasha of Bereshit, and in the parasha we have the death of Yaakov, and at the end the death of Yosef as well, setting up, of course, all the events of Sefer Shemot. What we're going to look at is really just the very beginning. and the blessing of the grandchildren who are accepted, they're adopted, as it were, by Yaakov, Ephraim, and Menashe. And we're just going to take a look at a few scattered individual things while looking as well at the text. So let's just start reading. Do I have a volunteer?
I will, because I'm doing it in Hebrew also. If you want, I could do it in Hebrew right now. Vayehi Yaakov. Nah, you don't want it, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know, it's fine with me.
That all the
Or I could just
time.
read it in Hebrew.
All right. I will read it in English.
Yes,
Jacob
but if you
lived-
want to hear it in Hebrew, you have to come tomorrow.
right.
Everyone's got to
that's
be in
it.
school
No.
tomorrow to
No,
hear
No,
something.
Saturday.
Saturday, that's right.
Saturday.
We're on
Saturday.
Thursdays now.
Yeah,
mind me.
right. Okay. Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt, so that the span of Jacob's life came to 147 years.
Okay, before we go any further, there's just a very interesting note in on the length of Yaakov's life, which Sarna points out in his commentary.
Yeah.
Yeah, 147. The lifespans of the three patriarchs lend themselves to factorization according to the following pattern. Avraham lives 5 by 5 by 7 years, Isaac 6 by 6 by 5, Jacob 7 by 7 by 3. As he pointed out in last week's parashah, he's not reaching the ages that his ancestors did. But in this series, the squared number increases by each time, while the coefficient decreases by 2. Furthermore, in each case, the sum of the factors is 17. Not having done well in math, I would never have gotten that.
Me
I don't
either.
even understand what
But-
it means.
Through their factorial patterns, the patriarchal chronologies constitute a rhetorical device expressing the profound biblical conviction that Israel's formative age was not a concatenation.
What does that mean?
Like a whole
Elaboration.
elaboration of haphazard incidents, but a series of events ordered according to God's grand design. It's very important to recognize that so much of the Tanakh, it tells its stories, in ways that the structure and the form, point to the content.
How? I
I
don't
think
see.
this term is a little misleading, Rabbi
understand.
Papi. Yeah, it doesn't mean grand design makes it sound like it was predestined. It wasn't predestined how long they would live. What happened was their lifespan reflected their merit. In other words, Yitzchak and Yaakov live Yitzchak and Avraham live
Right.
approximately the same number of years. But
Mhm.
Yaakov lives a lot less, and that point is made very strongly in Parshat Vayigash Ma'afarayim Hayu Yemei Shnei Chai. And that's because he wasn't on their level. Yitzchak and Abraham were tzaddikim through and through. Yeah, Yaakov started out life as a cheat and as a trickster and and it took him a hell of a long time to get his act together. But there's no way you're going to basically get off of him what he did when he was younger. And so the result is, and he also went through a lot of trials and tribulations, my father's term, because of the bad things he did ended up causing him all kinds of blowback. So that's why he didn't live as long.
Right.
There's one other thing here.
Wait a minute.
If you take,
Okay, wait a
If you
second. Susie has
take-
a question.
I don't
Question
understand.
first.
I don't understand, because we were told that when we look at Isaac in the Torah, it doesn't really say much about him.
It says enough to get a feel for the kind of human being he is. Chapter 26 is completely devoted to his interactions with the locals, and it becomes very clear that Yitzchak tries to live a good life. And despite all the attempts of the locals to basically undo that and sort of dig out from under him, he manages to continue to do the right thing, both by himself and by them. And in the end, they come to him and ask for an alliance. So there's no ifs or buts. Yitzchak is worthy to be Abraham's son. On the other hand, when Yaakov and Esav are born, it takes quite a while to figure out which of those two is really the one who's worthy to be Abraham's son. Yaakov is behaving in a way that makes us wonder whether or not he's even eligible. It only becomes apparent in Parshas Vayetze that yes, he might be eligible. In other words, the games you can play with the numbers, I would call after the fact. Okay, once we're going to settle down on numbers that basically reflect a certain message about reward and punishment, then we'll also basically come up with numbers that have that are like fun numbers. Sheish, Hena, Lotus, Bana, Vesheva. The way the Tanakh always plays around with numbers. But I think when you say grand design, that's a bit more than I think what Sefer Bereshit is trying to communicate. That reflects more what Sarna tried to communicate than what the Sefer itself is trying to communicate.
Although I do find it interesting that there is this numerical pattern, which seems to be, that it's not just haphazard, that there seems to be a pattern.
No, the pattern.
There's one more step in the pattern. And you would think that, let's go to the next generation, to Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
We know that he's 110, so that that doesn't fit, because you would think if the pattern continues, it would be 8 times 8 times 1, and that's only 64.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take the
it could be 8
that are squared and you add them up, 5 squared, 6 squared, and 7 squared, it equals 110.
I just think that basically this is, you could do a lot of things with numbers if you're into doing numbers. But I think you have to, as a Tanakh is using numbers just to basically, to make it even a more polished presentation, but not in order to teach moral lessons and values. Okay,
no, this is a different aspect. Yudi, there are myriad of aspects to the Tanakh, and the moral.
I'm not denying this is an aspect. I just object to the term grand design. God's grand design. It's not God's grand design. It's the writer of Sefer Bereshit is having a good time with the number of years these people lived.
But that's the point, that he's expressing something through the numbers that he or she is presenting. So anyway, I just found that interesting. So
Okay,
let's go on with verse 29.
And when the time approached for Israel to die, he summoned his son Joseph and said to him, "Do me this favor. Place your hand under my thigh as a pledge to your steadfast loyalty. Please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, take me up from Egypt and bury me in their burial place." He replied, I will do as you have spoken. And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed.
Yeah. So, here we have Yaakov, even though he has been brought down to Egypt, the promise to the patriarchs is not forgotten. And he wants to return to the land. He wants to be buried in the land and with his fathers. Okay, now Jacob's death takes a long time. It comes in a variety of scenes. Okay, go on, Susie.
Sometime afterward, Joseph was told, "Your father is ill." So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, "Your son Joseph has come to see you," Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed.
And as we'll come to a midrashic comment, but there's, I think, a great deal of humanity here in we see Jacob in his old age. We see his relationship with his sons, with his grandsons. And, here, like, he's ill, but, oh, your son is here. Boom, he's up. And I think that we all understand the strength that we feel from our children, from our grandchildren. Go ahead.
I just want to point out that it's weird that he is told your father is ill. Didn't he know all along that his father was ill?
Yeah.
Well, he
it's
would have been in the capital and they were down in Goshen. The family was down in Goshen. He would have been in Avaris, the capital.
I understand that, but after he was looking for his father, he said, is my father still alive? And he, hugged him and all that. After that reunion, you'd think he would have kept in touch.
Well,
I mean,
there are a lot of questions. On the other hand, to some
He's also the
extent,
first person to be referred to as being ill, so Joseph may not have known.
yeah, it is the first place. On the other hand, this is also called advancing the plot.
yes.
Sometimes, there are certain conventions in literature or for that in TV and movies. It's like in old Westerns, even up to Star Wars. The bad guys are all terrible shots. They almost always miss the good guys, no matter how many of them there are, no matter how many shots they take, they miss the good guys. The good guys get the bad guys with one shot.
A different take on this, okay? Because we're soon going to get into a situation where the two boys are brought to Yaakov, and Yaakov's been living in Egypt for 17 years, and somehow they're brought into the room, and okay, he doesn't see that well, but he certainly hears well. Generally speaking, when people lose their sight, their hearing gets better. And he doesn't even recognize who they are. I think Susie's quite right. There is no contact of any meaningful nature between him, between Yaakov and the brothers on one hand, and Yosef on the other. In other words, yes, Yaakov would probably like to see more of, Yosef would like to see more of Yaakov, but he sure as hell doesn't want to see more of the brothers. And it's just any more than Yaakov himself wanted to see Esav after they reconciled. The reconciliation was on paper, but when Esav offers Yaakov a military escort, Yaakov turns him down flat and says, oh no, I'll go on my own. In other words, they've been reconciled on paper, but they clearly have not really been reconciled, because as soon as Yaakov Avinu dies, the brothers come to Yosef and say, please now forgive us. Now it's already 39 years since the sale took place, and they still think Yosef wants to get them. Now, will you please explain to me how in 17 years that they lived together, even if they didn't live in the same place, they certainly were able to have contact with each other. And basically, and they're still worried that Yosef wants to get them. And with that, the Sefer finally comes to an end. In other words, Sefer Bereshit starts out by making a marker, which is, if brothers don't get along, then one can kill each other. And back in chapter 4, we have Cain killing Hevel. That's what could easily happen when you have rivalry among brothers. There's plenty of other rivalry. The whole book's about rivalry among brothers, but not one of them subsequently ends in one murdering another one. They have terrible fights, but they all get reconciled. But you got to understand, reconciliation, what's the old story? You forgive, but you don't forget. Okay? So I think Yosef would have probably gone to see Yaakov more often if it didn't mean that when he did that, he'd have to hang out with the brothers too. I think that's the true meaning of what we're being told here. And I think and your question, I think, Susie, you're right on.
The Midrash also has some interesting insights that suggest that Joseph did not want to be too close to Yaakov because he feared that Yaakov would ask him, what really happened? How you disappeared? What was going on? And he didn't want
And so
to
he didn't
bat
have to
out on
tell
his
his
brothers.
father that his brother sold him into slavery.
Right.
I think we have to realize that what the Midrash does, and what we're doing right here, is trying to fill in the details that simply aren't there.
Right.
And pardon me, they all present.
But the distancing is clear. I mean,
Yeah, but
that is there.
Well, actually, it's not that clear. It certainly seems that way to us, but it's not necessarily clear. It's not said explicitly. And I think we have to realize that a part of the power of the Torah, Tanakh, is that we don't necessarily have all the details. And that draws us in to think about what's really happening. Okay, he's in Egypt for 17 years. Why don't we hear about Jacob and Joseph? Why isn't Jacob sitting watching his son administer Egypt? He's a proud papa. Wouldn't Joseph have been happy to have his father seeing all that he has achieved? Why wouldn't they hear of more contact? So you have to wonder, why is there no contact? On the other hand, it may not be so. I mean, they're simply telling a story. And I think how we
I think
fill in the
He also
details.
has something against father.
Yeah,
Basically, his father's the one who told him to go down there at a point when his father should have had more sense. As now that he's established his father's alive, and he did what he had to do.
right.
But I'm sure he still has a certain amount of, what's the word? In Hebrew, it's tina, tat, yud.
Like a
Grudge.
complaint. It's not so much grudge. Tina is more like a complaint, an issue,
An issue. That's it. That's the
issue.
word I wanted. An issue over the fact that his father, knowing perfectly well that the brothers hated him, still sent them to give a message to them in a place where they were completely isolated, and the brothers could take the opportunity to kill him or sell him into slavery. That was
Yes, then again,
extremely poor judgment on Yaakov's side.
The brothers could also say, my God, none of you have learned anything. You've shown favoritism. Look what happens, and Joseph does the same thing. But then we also don't hear about Binyamin. Like, what did Joseph do for his brother? Who was so happy. This is his full brother.
He got them jobs. Now let's go over what he did for his brothers. I think that's clear. Number one, he gets them really important jobs as, for all practical purposes, chief herdsman of Pharaoh's flocks. These people are professional shepherds. It's like being asked to basically run some of the biggest ranches in the United States if you happen to be a cowboy. That's furthermore, he gives them achuzot. I mean, this is part of the reason why, look, the Haggadah tries very hard to say that we didn't intend to live permanently in Egypt, but that's not the pshat. If we didn't intend to live permanently there, why are we going ahead and taking possession of achuzot? Achuzot means property you can pass down to your children. This is all happening while the Egyptians are starving and losing their lands. I mean, it is very clear if you look at the end of Parshat Vayigash that what Yosef is doing is not going to do, it might be good for his brothers, but it's not going to be good for the Jews who come after his brothers. In other words, he's setting up a situation which is bound to cause friction between the native Egyptians and his family. Yeah, man, again, he wants to do for his mishpacha, but as a practical matter, what he's doing is not that wise. Okay, basically, we're hearing at the very same time how they're practically starving. And the last line is Vayeshev Yisrael B'Eretz Mitzrayim B'Eretz Goshen Vayachaz Zubah Vayefru Vayerbu Ma'od. Well, if that doesn't get across to you the point, you do realize Parshas Vayechi is not a break from Parshas Vayigash. There is no stop between the two. The whole stop in the Parsha system here is completely artificial. There is no petucha, there's no setuma. It just, that sentence runs right into Vayechi Yaakov.
Yeah.
So a correct reading would be to realize that, yeah, oh yeah, this family's very well taken care of. You know, that's the problem. And don't be too surprised if after this family dies, their children are going to end up in big trouble with the locals.
No, we know that happens.
Also, Nathan Lopez Cardozo points out that Yaakov, in effect, makes the same mistake when he blesses Ephraim ahead of Manasseh.
We're going to
and
get there in a
specifically
moment.
to concentrate on Joseph's kids. He does nothing for his other kids. Excuse me, his grandkids. He doesn't bless any of his other grandkids. It's only those two boys. So the favoritism continues. He hasn't learned anything.
Is not against favoritism. Rabbi Zucker, Sefer Bereishit endorses favoritism. It is not against it. It's the rabbis that basically came up with this idea that favoritism was a terrible idea. In a Sefer, it's the most natural thing in the world. Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav ki tzayid v'fiv Rivka ohevet et Yaakov. I mean, the Sefer assumes there's going to be favoritism. I mean, it does not condemn it. Okay, we can look at it and say, you know, something. This is not such a good thing.
The net result is we end up spending several hundred years in Egyptian bondage.
That's what the rabbis say, but that's not what Sefer Bereishit says. Sefer Bereishit says that was part of the grand design. You see, when Sarah comes up with a couple of mathematical formulas and calls them God's grand design, that's where I say stop. But when Avraham Avinu was told in Brit Bein Abitarim that the whole Shibud in Egypt is part of God's grand design, well, that's the Sefer itself telling you that, but Farish, without any ands, ifs, or buts. And it's not telling you that that's happening because of favoritism. It's happening because of God's grand design. I mean, you know, don't get me wrong. I am very much in favor of using Parshanim and Medrashim and whatever other supportive stuff we can use to help us out. But we should never confuse those with the Pshat.
Well, I think the Pshat is somewhat elusive to begin with, but that's my view on texts in general.
Okay, so should I go on?
Yes. So we're at verse 3.
And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me and said to me, I will make you fertile and numerous, making of you a community of peoples, and I will assign this land to your offspring to come for an everlasting possession. Now, your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine no less than Reuven and Shimon. But progeny born to you after them shall be yours. They shall be recorded instead of their brothers in their inheritance.
Okay, so Sarna points out that this is kind of formal adoption language as Yaakov adopts his grandchildren as his own, but just these 2, just the first 2 sons of Yaakov, of Yosef, not the other, exactly as point out, not the other grandchildren. Okay, go on.
I do this because when I was returning from Padam, Rachel died to my sorrow while I was journeying in the land of Canaan, when still some distance short of Ephrat, and I buried her there on the road to Ephrat, now Beit Lechem.
Where does JPS get I do this because? I find this insertion to be very, very questionable.
Yeah, I'm.
It does not say, and where does it say I do this because? I mean, I don't see any other translation even implying anything like
I don't know. Unfortunately, the people who did the translation are all dead. So,
Well, they wrote
so,
notes though, Rabbi Poppy. They did write notes. We have the notes.
yeah,
They did, anytime they made a change in the literal text, they left you a note to
Yeah.
explain on what basis they're making that change.
yeah, I don't have the notes here. I mean, I have them here, but they're downstairs. So,
Anyway, we're not learning the JPS, we're learning the Tanakh. And what I'm really trying to say here is we should understand that what the JPS is doing. If what you're learning primarily is an English translation, then you got to be extremely careful to point out that the English translation here is not reflecting what the text says.
yeah, as we've established that, you know, the JPS was great in its time and for what they were trying to do, but that's not how we would necessarily translate it today. And we've also learned something since they started in the 60s. So I think that, but let's just finish off this section.
Noticing Joseph's sons, Israel asked, "Who are these?" Now wait, didn't he already meet them?
Yes, he
Well,
was
did.
what I
it's
pointed
a
out
whole
before.
question whether he really knows them or doesn't know them. Go on.
And Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here. Bring them unto me," he said, "that I may bless them." Now Israel's eyes were dim with age, he could not see. So Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see you again, and here God has let me see your children as well."
So, well, which is kind of ironic since he really can't see. But you know, it does certainly this section seems to imply that does he
I think you
really
have to, it's
know
not
them?
saying he's blind. It means he's what you call today sight impaired. You understand what I'm saying? He can
Mhm.
see shadows. I think to reconstruct the scene, you do better to say that he has, he has cataracts. He doesn't see as well as he used to,
Right.
but shapes he probably does see, and he just can't identify from the shape who the person is. But it's
Okay.
not like he's can't see
Yeah.
anything at all.
However, here's where I think the Midrash seems to capture, again, a bit of humanity. I'm not bringing this in because this is the most amazing Midrash ever. But I do think that it's, I think that, yeah, this is it. I think it's kind of interesting that, we have to remember that as we're reading this, we are reading the story of a person who has gotten old and he is ill. And there's just a sensitivity that our rabbis have. Who would like to read this midrash?
I will, Rabbi.
Thank you, Ricky.
Scripture states elsewhere in allusion to this verse, "Therefore, let every faithful man pray to you in a time when you may be found."
Yeah, so they're taking a verse, a very typical fashion. They bring a verse from elsewhere in Tanakh, particularly in Ketuvim. Yeah, so and they bring this verse from Psalms.
That's my Rabbim level ego. I see this is very cute. That's the pasuk rachok. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, go on.
Rav Abba maintains, "In a time when you may be found" refers to old age. It is essential that a man pray for an old age in which his eyes may see, his mouth may eat, and his feet may walk. Normally, when a man becomes old, his faculties leave him. For example, it is written about Isaac, and it came to pass that when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see. And concerning Jacob, Scripture states, "Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see." As to a mouth that could not eat, we find that Barzillai said to David, "Can your servant taste what he eats or drinks? Can I still listen to the singing of men and women? Why then should your servant continue to be a burden to my lord king?
Yeah, here David wants Barzillai to accompany him, and it says that Barzillai is 80 years old, and he's saying, listen, go on, it's for young people. Totally, it's a story, it's actually, I
And it
totally
also
forgot.
says, take my son, he'll enjoy this.
Yeah, so, again, this is not necessarily the deepest midrash, and of course, the classic picture of old age is in Kohelet, where he describes a house that's kind of falling apart or castle that's falling apart. And but I think it's important because we're reading in the parasha, and then also in the Haftarah, although here we see David in the Haftarah being a little bit stronger, giving advice to his son Solomon. But before that, the scene in this week's Haftarah, we have David being the big, strong, virile David, very, very weak and being manipulated by everybody around him. So, I think that just this midrash kind of captures that there's a bit of humanity behind all of this, that there's a person. Now, to some extent, we can also say to Jacob, like, well, you were willing to take advantage of your father. So, now you know what it feels like. I mean, though they're not taking advantage of him necessarily at this point. But your father suffered, now you suffer from it. But still, there's the sense that that they knew then, that we know today, that getting old is not easy. And as my uncle always says, getting old, used to say, alav hashalom, getting old isn't for sissies.
That's
they
exactly
all
what
say
my
that.
mother used to say.
Philip Roth said it's a train wreck.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's
And North Train.
yeah. So I just think the midrash brings in a little bit of humanity here. I mean, that I think we feel that already in the text. But I just thought that was interesting. Okay, let's go on with this blessing of the grandchildren. All right, Rick, you can go on, verse 12.
Joseph then removed them from his knees and bowed low with his face to the ground. Joseph took the two of them, Ephraim with his right hand to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand to Israel's right, and brought them close to him.
Okay, that sentence kind of stands out.
Yes.
It doesn't say he just brought them to his father. He brought Ephraim to the right hand, that is to Israel's left. And, it's like there's so much detail, something is going to happen. Go on.
But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, thus crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn.
And again, can we not emphasize this enough? And then let's take a look at the bracha.
And he blessed Joseph, saying, the God in whose ways my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from my birth to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, bless the lads. In them may my name be recalled, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth.
Okay, so some of you may be familiar with these words because they have been used in our liturgy. I mean, it's a beautiful bracha. And let me just get back to that page. We have this in the Siddur, this line, the messenger has redeemed me from all harm, rather than just translating it as malach. We'll come back to that in a moment. We should know that in both the Ashkenazic and Sephardic Siddurim, that we have these words in Kriyat Shema al Hamitah, and also in Motzei Shabbat, there's a section that begins Vayitein Lecha. It's a collection of very beautiful verses, and it appears there. And there's now a melody for this, which I'd never really heard it, because when I was growing up, it was just, you said Shema. I didn't learn all of the other text that goes with it for evening Shema. And I was never in a congregation that recited the words of Vayitein Lecha. And certainly in my family, they didn't do it. And we know that.
Sure, but in your congregation, you knew that they were going to say this when they called up Narim on Simchat Torah.
Right, yeah.
That's a pretty
Well,
big
actually,
deal.
that didn't happen in all of my congregations, to be honest.
Well,
it
you
didn't.
had a lot of congregations, Rabbi Popke, a great more than most people.
Yeah.
So, most
they
of
were-
us, though.
No,
Yeah,
I know.
so, yeah, but the fact is that they're very beautiful, and it's interesting to see. It's important for us to recognize how the Tanakh has influenced our liturgy and how much we are connected in that. And then, of course, on Friday nights, may God make you like Ephraim and Menashe, so that the words of the Bible continue to echo throughout our liturgy. Now, sometimes, like Psalms, they're taken, the whole piece is taken. Other times they are quoted. Times they're just slightly edited when they're quoted, like the Shalosh Esrei Midot, and also the bracha, or the opening of the first bracha before the Shema in the morning. Some of these things are edited, but they're drawing very much on the language of Tanakh. And it's important to realize, the connections we have and where some of these lines come from. Even when you think of Lecha Dodi, which is the Paitan who writes Lecha Dodi utilizes the beautiful verses in Yeshayahu, second Isaiah, that we know from the Haftarot of the period following Tisha B'Av. So, this has become very popular with the melody, and it's always been part of our tradition. So, just wanted to bring that in. But also, this is an interesting phrase. So let's take a look back at the context. And
Read that already.
Yaakov gives the blessing. And what does he say?
The God in whose ways my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked, the God who has been my shepherd from my birth to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, bless the lads.
What's unusual about that?
The angel.
The angel.
Right. What angel? That has been with him. And also it's talking about God, and then suddenly the angel. But here, notice how they capitalized in the translation, the angel. So let's take a look at what some of the Mefarshim have had to say. So Rashi says, he's going to translate Malach Goeloti, the angel, or here probably better to say messenger, because that's what Malach really means. Malach haragil ishtaleach elai b'tzarati. The angel who is normally sent to me in my trouble. As it says, Vayomer elai malach Elohim b'chalom, and just in last week's parasha, as the angel of God said to me in a dream, Yaakov, Yaakov, Vayomer hineni, and he said, here I am, and goes on and says, Anochi el Beit El, I am the God that you met at Beit El. So, clear, though the malach is calling to him, it's God who's speaking to him. Not all that different from when the malach is going to call out from the bush to speak to Moshe, and we know it's not a malach per se as much as it is God. And here too, let's take a look at Sforno's commentary. Somebody like to read? Somebody else?
I'll read, and
Thank you,
I'll
Charlotte.
read, Rabbi. The angel who has redeemed me from all harm, bless. He commanded that the angel who redeemed me bless the lads if they are not fitting for your blessing without an intermediary.
Yeah. So, here they're all trying to hold on to this notion that it literally means malach. But Ora Chaim has a slightly different reading.
Of the angel who has redeemed me. The explanation is that any word of God which he issues to or on behalf of those who love him is called malach. The voice of God kindles flames of fire.
Kol
intent-
Adonai, we know that from the Kabbalat Shabbat and Shabbat morning. So,
Jacob's
go ahead, sorry.
Jacob's intention is in saying the angel, etc., expressed the hope that God's word would be their help and he would bless them.
So here, Ora Chaim is getting closer, not so much keeping on the idea of an angel or messenger, but really that it's kind of interchangeable with God. He's kind of picking up on that. And that's
Especially if you use the name of God, Elohim, rather than Hashem. In other words, I don't think, in fact, I think that's what's being done here.
Yeah.
Plenty of times in Sefer Bereshit, Elohim doesn't even mean Hashem at all. It just means the gods. When Yosef says to his brothers, Eka Elohim ani yareh, well, it's clear that the way the brothers are going to pick that up is I'm a God-fearing man, or I fear the gods. And I could show you several other places that, Hituo T Elohim, Ibeta V Elohim has a plural verb following it. In other words, the point is, it's not that hard to go from Elohim to Kedoshim to Malachim, because Elohim itself is a secondary thing compared to Hashem, which is the real deal, and once in a while they use Elohim interchangeably with Hashem, and other times they'll use Elohim interchangeably with Kedoshim and Malachim. The implication being that with the heavenly forces, they're all sort of one package, but they're sometimes a different. And that's why we have to have Oseh Shalom Ben Romov, because even they don't really get along, or send out the same message all the time. So I agree 100% with your using of the burning bush story as an example of how one leads into the other, and basically, and that I think what's being expressed here. In other words, after all, Yaakov Avinu's had Malachim following him around wherever he goes. He had them when he was about to leave Eretz Israel, going up and down on the ladder. At the time comes to go home, he has another dream where he has Malachim. Malachim are talking to him. He sees Malachim when he's about to cross Machane Elohim Zed. That's the last line in Parshat Vayetze. Then it's right after that, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim Lefanov. Now we know those Malachim are straight human beings, but it's sort of hard not to see that the words are intentionally being bounced off each other in a Perona major way. So it seems to me that this is just an appropriate ending to a story of a man who has been bouncing around with angels since day one.
Yeah, but also recognizing that, it's really God who's controlling it, even if there are angels there. So especially because he talks about God, it's God, calls God shepherd, very common image. And here, Sarna seems to think that Malach really is an epithet of God, but he also kind of fudges it a little bit. So he says here in biblical, he refers to as excursus of biblical angelology, and the capitalization reflects the fact that the parallelistic structure of verses 15 to 16 strongly suggests that angel is here an epithet of God. But Charlotte, you were reading? Do you want to go on here? No one in the Bible
ever invokes an angel in prayer, nor in Jacob's several encounters with angels is there any mention of one who delivers him from harm. When the patriarch feels himself to be in mortal danger, he prays directly to God, as in 32, 10 to 13.
Yeah.
And it is he who again and again is Jacob's guardian and protector.
Yeah, and all those verses.
Guardian
go on.
angel.
Yeah,
Yeah. Admittedly, angel as an epithet for God is extraordinary. But since angels are often simply extensions of the divine personality, the distinction between God and angel in the biblical texts is frequently blurred.
yeah, and he in
Nevertheless-
quotes, by the way, the Exodus is the verses at the burning bush. Go on, sorry.
Nevertheless, this verse may reflect some tradition associated with Bethel, not preserved in Genesis, concerning an angelic guardian of Jacob. An echo of this may be found in Hosea 12:5.
Yeah,
Yosam Malach Vayuchal. And also, let's keep in mind Psalms. Chonem Malach Hashem Saviv Lirei Vayachalsem. Ki Malachav Yitzaveh Lach
Lishmorcha b'chol drachecha.
You know, so I mean, to me, this is very much consistent with the basic view of the Tanakh that, you know, Hashem is one, but, you know, there's all kinds of forces that emanate, so to speak, from the one that are represented. And so on and so forth. You know, so this is, I think, in other words, I think that's what you're seeing here.
yeah. So let's
There's
go
a
back.
personal angel. It's simply that, you know, we assume that basically God, you know, it's also a sign of noblesse oblige. You don't want to say that God personally protects you.
Right.
God sends you a guardian angel. Shalom aleichem malachei asherei malachei elyon. You know, why not just welcome Hashem into your home? Well, that's just a little bit much, you know. So we'll sort of downgrade this a bit to make it a bit more comfortable to say it.
Yeah. So Charlotte, you want to go on here with the story?
When Joseph saw that his father was placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he thought it wrong. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's. Not so, father, Joseph said to his father, for the other is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. But his father objected, saying, I know, my son, I know. He too shall become a people, and he too shall be great. Yet his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall be plentiful enough for nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, by you shall Israel invoke blessings, saying, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. And thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh.
Yeah, so to some extent, consistency in the Bible. The younger always supplants the older, and certainly this was goes back to Yaakov's own life.
Go straight down to David and Solomon.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's a straight consistency through the entire narrative works of the Tanakh.
Yeah, but my teacher Baruch Schwartz wrote an article for the Torah.com. We're not going to be able to read the whole thing, but just he has a very unique interpretation of he found a very unique interpretation of this particular blessing, as he has, and here's what he has to say. So first of all, we have the text that we just read, that God blesses his grandchildren. Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. So here's what Baruch has to say. Who would like to read here?
I'll read.
Okay, thank you, Carol.
Read in its context, the concluding sentence, and he placed Ephraim before Manasseh, appears to be the narrator's way of recapitulating and summarizing what has just occurred. This is the interpretation offered by some of the classical commentators, for instance, Rambam and Ibn Ezra.
Rashbam, not Rambam, Rashbam.
Rashbam and Ibn Ezra. According to this view, the verb in the clause,
Vayasem.
Vayasem, he placed, means he mentioned Ephraim before Manasseh. The Midrash commenting on the concluding words of the verse, and he placed Ephraim before Manasseh, suggests that this seemingly superfluous repetition of what has already been said is designed to convey that in addition to blessing Ephraim and Manasseh on that day, Jacob also determined that from that day forward, Ephraim and his descendants would precede Manasseh, his descendants in all matters.
Yeah, and here's what the Midrash says.
And he blessed them on that day, and he placed Ephraim before Manasseh, just as he placed him first here, so did so everywhere.
Yeah, and then he brings in from the Midrash a series of places where Ephraim precedes Manasseh. And then, not surprisingly, Rashi adopts the position taken by the Midrash. Go on.
And he placed Ephraim before Manasseh in his blessing, so as to establish his precedence with regard to the tribal divisions and the dedication offerings of the tribal chieftains.
Yeah, okay, so again, it's just that Ephraim, it takes precedence. Well, I don't know as much takes precedence, but comes before Manasseh in all cases. Bayasem is really doing something. It's not just that he happens to be mentioned first, but that's really what will happen. And then he turns to a commentary by Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, who was a very important spiritual figure in Germany in like the 12th, 13th century. And apparently his son compiled an anthology of his father's commentaries on the Bible. And we find something a little bit surprising. Go ahead.
Although Rabbi Judah's interpretation, which appears in his commentary on the Torah, compiled posthumously and from memory by his son, Rabbi Moshe Zaltman, agrees with Genesis Rabbah and Rashi with regard to the meaning of the verb vayasem he placed. His understanding of the verse differs radically from theirs. And he placed Ephraim before Manasseh. My father believed the subject of the verb placed to be Moses, not Jacob.
Really?
Where'd
That's
you get that from?
well,
Really?
that's it. It's like, what? Where would he get that from? Exactly. So he goes on.
Thus, Moses placed the tribe of Ephraim before the tribe of Manasseh at the head of a tribal division.
So he's really talking about what's happening in the time of Moshe.
Yeah, we should make this a little more clear, Rabbi Popke, I think. What's happening is that the camp of 12 tribes is divided into 4 subcamps.
Right.
And one of the 4 subcamps is Degel Machane Ephraim.
Ephraim.
That Ephraim there is before Manasseh. But elsewhere in Tanakh, subsequent to Jacob's blessing, often Manasseh does come before
Ephraim.
Joshua, in Chalu b'nei Yisrael, Manasseh v'Ephraim. It's nothing like, for example, the Rachel Leah, where once that event takes place, no one ever puts Leah's name before Rachel in any context whatsoever. In Megillat Ruth, the very sons of Leah go around and give a blessing saying, may this woman be in your household, Rachel, Leah. Those are Leah's children who are basically putting Rachel first. That becomes fixed. This does not become fixed. In other words, this is what Yaakov seems to have wanted, but it did not become fixed. And what I think the Parshan is saying here is, but Moshe did adopt it.
Yeah. So let's go on just to read a little bit more. I didn't bring in all of, you can look on the Torah.com.
Yeah, I'll send you the search.
No, that's all right. But I've got Baruch's article. So anyone go on, Carol?
This is because Jacob had said his younger brother will be greater than he.
Okay, that's explaining why Moshe places Ephraim before Manasseh. Okay, and here's just one of his explanations.
My father explained that immediately after they left Egypt, they were counted by Moses and arrange themselves in divisions on their own until the second year, at which time they did so according to the instructions given by the Holy One. Having established that the phrase, he placed Ephraim before Manasseh, refers to Moses determining the configuration of the Israelite tribes as they left Egypt, Rabbi Judah takes several even more surprising steps. Having established that the phrase, he placed Ephraim before Manasseh, refers to Moses determining the configuration of the Israelite tribes as they left Egypt, Rabbi Judah takes several even more surprising
Yeah,
steps.
now here they are.
And Joshua must have written this, or the men of the great assembly, for if Moses had written it, he would have had to formulate it, and I placed Ephraim before Manasseh. Just as in immediately following statement where he says, I have given you one portion more than your brothers, which my father explained, Moses wrote in the 40th year.
Yeah, the 40th year of wandering in the desert. And then Professor Schwartz's comment.
In this brief passage, Rabbi Judah asserts that the parenthetical comment about Moses organizing the tribal divisions must have been written after Moses' own time by Joshua or even much later. The verse 22, I have given you one portion more than to your brothers, also refers to an action performed by Moses, not Jacob. And 3, that verse 22 was written by Moses at the very end of his life.
Now, this is to some extent a major concern of the Torah.com, but basically here is a commentator from 12th or 13th century that is already picking up on the fact, or at least is open to the idea that some of the things written down in the Torah could have been written later, by even projecting back into Jacob's words. They're not really Jacob's words, they're really Moshe's words, or even Joshua's words and the words of the great assembly. I do not think this is the shot of the text, but it is fascinating that we do have traditional Mefarshim who are willing to acknowledge, not so much acknowledge, but are willing to look at the text and the text of the Torah and say, maybe it's not all Moses, maybe it's not all from the specific time that's being described.
Of course, criticism is older than the 18th century.
Yeah, and for as much as we look at contemporary biblical scholarship and, going back even before the 18th century when, they recognized that Deuteronomy, the Veta recognizes that Deuteronomy has its own style, we make certain, or I should say that religious communities make certain, if you will, faith statements or comments about the sacred literature that the sacred literature itself doesn't necessarily make, and that it doesn't mean that the literature is all written later, or that it's not true, but the fact is that there were those within a religious tradition, very pious and committed people, that recognized that, in fact, the literature developed over time, and that there is a possibility that we can see some of the seams. I happen to be doing a little bit of study in the New Testament at the moment, and if you ask many Christians who wrote the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll say, oh, the apostles. However, the apostles, nowhere in the Gospels does it say that the apostles wrote the Gospels, and highly unlikely, at least for 3 of them, because they were written well after Jesus. But sometimes we take these pious stands, and in fact, tradition is a little bit more open and acknowledging the history of the text, or the possible history of the text. Again, I don't think Rabbi Yehuda Chassid is necessarily capturing the pshat, although Baruch Schwartz goes on to point out how clever his interpretation is and how it actually deals with some later issues in Tanakh. But so I just wanted to really look at this opening of Parashat Vayechi, and the whole blessing. First of all, the humanity that's captured, and understanding what's going on with Yosef, with Yaakov, and then the blessing of the children, which stands out in our liturgy and in our tradition, and then finally this rather interesting little note about Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, a very fascinating kind of commentary. So thank you very much. Good questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Everybody have a great day.
Thank you. Try.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.